Why don't I talk a bit about the panel process that Barclays went through this year, because we completely overhauled our panel. Previously, we have had specific panels for specific areas, and actually we looked at our legal spend, which you can imagine has grown hugely over the last few years and has changed. It has changed from third-party spend, where our clients reimburse us, to own account spend, where we're needing a lot more regulatory advice, a lot more investigations support. That's got a lot of scrutiny at a senior level, and we've been challenged to reduce that spend. So we looked at how we could do that. And so we revolutionised the panel and made it much simpler. Rather than having specific expertise panels, we have divided our panel into two areas. One is called our strategic panel, our preferred panel, and that has 19 firms on it. And then we have an approved panel for those areas where we need support. It's important work, but it's not core to to where the main legal spend is. So 19 firms on the panel, mostly in the UK and the US, because that's where most of Barclays' spend is. Over 80% of our spend is UK and US. And we had a good look at firms who could be strategic partners with us. And that's partly about legal advice, but it's also about firms who have revolutionary approaches to billing and who are prepared to give us value back. And we now operate a relationship account, which all firms have to credit, and then we can draw on it to get increased value. That could be secondees, but it also could be training, it could be actually cash back as well. And that has come out of the landscape where we need to be getting more value out of our firms given the size of our legal spend.
We've been challenged for a long time in looking at reducing legal spend, and I'm sure most of you are aware. Some 7-8 years ago, we entered into what at the time was a groundbreaking arrangement with Eversheds, whereby we effectively single-sourced the majority of our legal work to that firm across Europe, Middle East and Africa. In the time that the arrangement's been in place, I've been able to deliver some significant cost savings to the business. They've come not particularly through great innovation in billing arrangements. It started fundamentally by setting out some ground rules that apply to all the firms in the Eversheds network that we use. And those ground rules are things such as we only have one lawyer, and the work is carried out at the appropriate level depending on what it is. And by doing that, we've been able to get much better control over what goes out and what we're being charged. And we've been using the Serengeti system for billing throughout this period. That gives me hard data, looking at what we spend, what disciplines, what countries, and that's been very helpful for me in looking at ways of reshaping the internal team to make sure that we've got the resource in the right place.
In terms of my job, I occasionally do a bit of law, which I have to say is increasingly probably rare for me, and actually quite a nice treat now and again. But most of my time is really spent being a member of the leadership team of our business and really sort of flexing the resources that we've got, which are static and will not change, to those areas that kind of really need the most, that need the real kind of internal subject matter expertise. My job is also a change job, and so it's about looking at what we do and saying, well, is that a good use of our time internally, or is there another way of doing it? And if so, let's package it up and get rid of it. And also in terms of what we keep, how can we do that more efficiently and demonstrate kind of real value? There is a large part of my role which is also demonstrating our value to the business in whatever way I can do that. Sometimes that's hard data like reducing spend, some of that is increasing or reducing, I should say, cycle time. So all of the issues that Julia mentioned, and lots of them have been mentioned already, are really kind of resonate with me. There's somebody who's kind of effectively managing a legal department, yes, but something which is just another function, within a business. We don't have a formal panel. We are more agile, in inverted commas, in terms of how we choose and use legal advisors. But we do look absolutely for a number of the things, again, that Julia mentioned, and that is not necessarily cheap, certainly not necessarily cheap if we're looking for a brain surgeon rather than a general surgeon. But we are looking for people who can demonstrate to us that the work they're going to do for us will be done as efficiently as possible. Therefore, it's not necessarily about the headline rate, but it is demonstrating that you've, as a firm, have taken real steps to make sure that the bill that I get is an efficient bill as possible. We also look for firms that embrace the culture of innovation, the I word, whatever that means to you. That means different things to different people. We as an organisation are constantly pushed by our clients to be innovative, and we do that, expect that of our external firms as well. What that means we can talk about, I guess. But
when I was thinking about how I would open this, I was thinking about the major challenge for the law firms, and for me, I think it boils down to differentiation. I conducted a panel review at the beginning of this year, and the aim was to reduce our panel down from 11 firms to around 7 or 8, and the purpose of that was to drive deeper relationships, spread the cost out or the pie out between fewer firms, driving more value. And we conducted 2 days of interviews, pitches, and it was quite startling. It touched on a couple of points that Julia mentioned earlier. Without exception, every firm bought 5 people. 4 partners, 1 token woman, 1 token associate, grey suits, for an hour, time after time after time. Only 1 firm brought a tablet and showed us an interactive portal, an extranet, showed us how they would manage our caseload. Every single firm brought a pile of paper, white papers, brochures, something. By the end of the day, I had a stack this big of things. Anyone that knows anything about Vodafone would know that we operate a paperless office. I don't have a desk, I don't have a filing cabinet, I have nowhere to put these things. So at the end of the day, they went in the bin. And that's it's a really good illustration for me of how one firm can stand out by doing something relatively minor. And that firm did make it onto the panel. They are now doing some of our volume work using the case management tool that they demonstrated to us. They're using e-billing. Just the introduction of that change for us has meant I've reduced my team by 1 FTE because I used to have to employ someone to do the admin, to go through the bills every month on the volume things. That, for me, is creating real value. The cost actually hasn't changed from the previous firm, but the value to me has.
Thank you. That's really, really important. But what was the most frustrating thing you found? What was the thing you would have changed in the process vis-a-vis the relationships with the law firms who were pitching?
Actually, the number of stupid questions that we got. Some fairly basic questions on process was frustrating to deal with. Actually, and coming to one of your points from earlier, Julia, I think the better answer probably is the number of firms that didn't answer the question about diversity policy properly. It's just saying, yeah, we've got one. Well, good, but tell me about it. Or saying we've got this fantastic policy where, yeah, we're diverse. Like, okay, well, give me some more information, because we were scoring on those policies. We wanted to see some useful, different answers and to have some substance there. And it was actually quite hard. The in-house lawyers were all allocated firms to score to feed back into the central team, and it was quite hard to score them without that detail. So it's it wasn't even the core substance about the legal advice bit. It was that extra stuff that's important to us as a client, that we need to have suppliers of all types who adhere to our values, and that includes things like diversity.
I think I think what very often on the diversity issue, for example, I mean, as you mentioned, corporates have strong views on these and things, and I think what people don't get very often is that when you do turn up with 5 grey suits, that would suggest that in terms of a breadth and diversity of actual thinking, never mind whether they're female or male or whatever else it happens to be, it's just not there, because you're looking at essentially probably 5 people who think in much the same sort of way. And that's so, yes, obviously we want more females on the team, we want more LGBT people on the team, but actually what we really want from that and the benefit of it is the kind of diversity of thinking and views that brings to any project.
Dave, do you want to comment?
Yeah, the point I was going to make is that I look at law firms and think that if we take out the work that goes to the magic circle, for the rest of it, most reputable law firms can do the work. So it really is about, how you differentiate yourself, when you meet with the client. When we had a process for deciding which law firm to use when we converged. And the thing that stood out, and the reason we went with Evershed at the time, really was because, first of all, they were the only firm who said that they would put a full-time project manager on our caseload, which, given that we were converging from 272 law firms down to 1 across the whole of EMEA, it needed somebody to manage that project. And, they invested a lot of time and effort in order to ensure that they managed to provide us with what was one of our key criteria, which was a consistency of service. But has had to be an ongoing thing, that as time's gone on, we've changed our requirements due to pressures from the board, particularly on reducing costs. So we, like everyone else on the panel, have been looking at how we can do things better, more effectively, be more creative. And every time we come up with an idea, Eversheds then have to cascade that across all their offices to make sure that it's implemented.
Yeah, I think it's really true what you were saying about what you're looking for in a law firm. I have a team of 60 lawyers in the UK supporting Vodafone, and Vodafone globally has nearly 400 lawyers. So what do I need from external law firms is actually some diversity of thinking. I want a sounding board. I want someone to pick up that I can pick up the phone to and to say, what do you think about this? It might not be a technical legal problem, but I want someone with experience and expertise that I can ask a question of and get a straight answer back from. I don't want a 30-page document. I don't want something that's caveated by this and that. I just want your opinion. And I think that kind of diversity of thinking that you get by having a well-rounded firm and how you demonstrate that and differentiate yourselves is really would be a key driver for me in the law firm that I would choose.
I think one of the real challenges for law firms is to get away from feeling that you've got to tell the client how clever you are by producing, page after page after page of legal analysis. My latest fad is advice on a page, because in a world where more and more work is done while you are on the move, on iPhones, etc. I don't know about you, but I actually lose the will to live if I have to keep scrolling down. So if I get some advice, I actually want to know what the answer is. Now, that doesn't mean to say that the work hasn't been done in order to come up with the right answer. I don't need to read it. I wouldn't be employing you as a law firm if I didn't think you got the capability to do it. So that is actually the new challenge for Evershed's sort of advice on the page. It's also a challenge for my in-house team, because I've got in-house lawyers who like to tell the business how clever they are. So, you know, that is one thing I would say to you is something to think about, particularly when you're dealing with general counsel. Similarly, you know, the other thing that we've been challenged by the business to do is to be more prepared to take risk, calculated, you know, educated risk, and not have to provide sort of the perfect answer. Because in the business world, you know, there rarely is a perfect answer. You know, the business leaders are constantly making judgment calls as to what to do based on the information they've got available. And what they're saying to me is, David, we're doing that in the business world, in the commercial world. It's what we expect from you. And on the vast majority of work that comes across my desk, you know, there is no necessarily right or wrong answer, but it's about giving the business a steer as to where to go, what the risks are with a particular course of action. And again, I think law firms can learn a lot from that approach.
Just changing focus a little bit, because I think this may be something that you guys in the audience might want to participate in. One of the things I spoke about was, which I've seen, is this horses for courses. So a move to look at how you get your legal service provision. So do you go to contract managers? Are you looking at outsourcing? You know, how are you looking at a sort of menu of different providers, as opposed to, well, we've got our two law firms and that's what we do. So there's different models. So maybe just starting with Angela. I mean, I know you've repanelled, but how are you looking at everything that you're doing?
The quick answer is we absolutely are. And we are about to launch a proper panel for alternative providers as well, which is separate from the law firm panel. So that work was kicked off earlier in the year, and basically we decided to focus on the law firm panel, so we postponed it, but it will be coming back. And we're looking at a variety of options on that. So we use contractors, for example, a lot on regulatory work, because we are staffed for business as usual in the in-house legal team. We're not staffed for, we need to implement this piece of regulation and we need to work the impact out. So we use contractors for that. We also use contractors a lot for maternity leave. That's a really big issue for us at the moment. I have about 30 to 40% of my team out on maternity leave at the moment. When you've got that level of HR issues to deal with, you need providers. You need flexible providers as well. And so we're using contractors a lot for that. But we're also looking at some of the more alternative types of work, ways of working. So there are examples of contractors coming in to work on a project and then working with a law firm, for example. Or we might just use the outsourcing provider. We're looking at a lot at law firms who are prepared to work with cheaper alternatives, particularly, for example, on a real estate finance. That's a fairly obvious one where we want the due diligence done by a cheaper, perhaps regional firm, but it might be that it's a key, very important piece of financing, so it's worth having a magic circle firm on there as well. This isn't new stuff, I know, but we're looking at all of that and looking at actually firms to come up with solutions for us. There are lots of firms who say, tell us how to work and we'll work that way. They're like, no, you come to us with some ideas. And it's the firms who are doing that that are getting to see some of the senior people in legal to talk through their ideas, because that creative thinking is adding the value that we need.
There is absolutely a place for the sort of top-end brain surgery of the legal world that will always be there and that you're always happy to pay for. And in the middle is the stuff that we would like to think that we're the real experts in, and that we need to free up time to really focus on those projects that are really critical to the business and its strategy. And then there is the rest. And the rest, you know, in some ways it feels almost not like a conversation anymore, because I think it's almost like that would never go to a law firm in our word. It would just not going to go in that direction. It is always going to go, and it might go to a law firm that has some kind of alternative structure, a kind of more cost-effective, you know, near-shored structure, off-shored structure, whatever it happens to be. But that work would never go to a full-service legal firm. So, again, you know, whether it's a body shop or a managed service outsourcing provider, of which there are an increasing number, that's definitely the way that we would go. I mean, I think the interesting thing is, you know, there are a number of law firms that we use that do have cheaper alternative, I hate to use the C word, but cheaper alternative, kind of body shop type operations. I don't think any of them have actually come to us proactively and knocked on the door and said, well, this is actually what we could do for you with this. What is it that you're doing now? What are you going to kind of outsource to other people? This is how we could help. And I find that a bit surprising, I have to say. So absolutely looking at it, and you know would welcome approaches from people to come and talk to us about what they can do.
Yeah, I think it's surprising how few. I mean, I'm looking at the moment at workflow demand management, contract automation, electronic signatures, how we get our workforce, Vodafone sales guys, out in the world signing contracts quicker, because that's what generates our revenue. And we have so few firms that will come to us and say, this is how you can do it. We will help you on that journey. And actually, I'm going out and saying, do you do this? Can I find that? And it's hard. It's hard to sit here and say who does what. So I would really welcome somebody to come to me and say, I have a solution for this. But there are very few firms out there that I think are looking at it. Recognising
this sort of shift in thinking, there is work that, frankly, you know, firms of a certain size are never going to get their hands on, and that's just that. It's just not going to happen. You know, in terms of, you know, we've mentioned the kind of risk of complacency, and you know, once a year lunch is not really going to crack it anymore, unfortunately. You know, we also appreciate firms who come to us and talk to us about how they could help us with things that they're never going to do for us, if that makes sense. So how can they, and there are a number of firms actually that have done this particularly, how can they help us with, document automation, for example? How can they help us with those smaller things that we would never give them, but actually, if they come and talk to us about it, that is a real big plus for the relationship. And you never know, it might lead to some fee-paying work out of it as well.
At Tyco, we have and do use an offshore provider to prepare sort of standard third-party contracts, so distribution agreements, agency agreements, things of that nature. They're based out in India, and we started working with them back in about 2010 when we introduced a system for ensuring compliance with the various anti-bribery legislation around the world. And that's worked very effectively. At the moment, internally, we're looking at ways of standardising some processes, particularly sort of in the area of contract management. We have created a contract manager function to deal with the sales contracts, which is working very effectively. And what I envisage happening is that as we do get some standard processes in place, that will highlight other opportunities where there are types of work that can more suitably be outsourced to a low-cost provider.
Perhaps just as a final word from the panel to say, you know, there is probably innovation going on. You really need innovation. Somehow, the communication doesn't seem to be happening as far as I can see. Would you say that was fair? How do you think?
I think it's happening in pockets, but I'm not sure that the firms are always as strategic as they might be about it. So you'll have individual partners talk to their contacts, but they won't necessarily be joining the dots. So I would say that's one of the challenges. But, I mean, we've got exactly the same as Sarah in relation to the digital agenda. I've got a lot of pressure from the business wanting to go down the electronic signature route because it gets the money out the door quicker if you don't have to wait for the post. We are approaching firms about that. It's not the other way around, and it would be great to hear people's views on how that can work effectively. Even if there's some technology that you're aware of, for example, that would be good to hear about.
Yeah, I suppose I'm in a slightly different position, having had a relationship with one firm for 7-8 years. So, the regular communication that I have with the client relationship partner, has brought out, in the course of those discussions, has brought out, ways of doing things differently. So, on that basis, I'm satisfied. I think the challenge for us is more internal at the moment. Tyco, is a very disparate company. We're slowly coming together, as I said before, to standardise practices and processes. And I think it's once we get to that stage, it'll be a case of looking at what's out there in terms of finding, better ways, possibly, of doing some of the work.
There's clearly very good stuff going on. If you look at the delegate list today, you can see the titles are probably very different to the ones you'd have seen, even a couple of years ago. So that's great. I think, need to shout about it an awful lot more, because who knows about this stuff. And I think actually it's an incredibly exciting time for firms, and actually if you get this right and you really embrace it, then I think it is really exciting. I think it's also really exciting for your employees, and as people worry about people not wanting to stay with law firms, if they're actually working in an environment which is kind of your day job partly, your remuneration possibly is innovation and how to do things better, I think there's a much greater chance of you keeping sort of younger, tech-savvy, hungry lawyers in your firms and doing different things for clients.